Welcome everyone to this very special Recorded Books author Q&A. My name is Brian Sweany, Director of Acquisitions for Recorded Books, and I'll be your host today. Our guest author who has so graciously offered to grace us with his time and wisdom is Craig Johnson. Welcome, Craig.
Good to be here, Brian. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Now, before I get to the questions, I must, of course, embarrass you with the obligatory backstory and glowing praise. You're the author of the New York Times bestselling Sheriff Walt Longmire series. Correct my math here if I have it wrong, but you're up to, it'll be 17 novels in the core series this September.
It is. Way to go. Like, no, hardly anybody ever gets that right. So yeah, you're already off to a magnificent start. Like,
yeah, I'm trying. Plus, what, a half dozen novellas, e-shorts, and short stories that are based in the Longmire world, right?
They are.
Okay. In 2012, your books were adapted into the magnificent Longmire TV series that ran for 6 seasons, first on A&E and then moved over to Netflix. And to this day, little piece of trivia, and which I'm sure you know, but our viewers and listeners might not, Longmire ranks as A&E's #1 original series premiere of all time with 4.1 million total viewers. So that's pretty cool.
It is. It is.
Your journey as an author began with Cold Dish in 2004, and then the Sheriff Longmire series has since been translated into 14 languages. Recorded Books started publishing you shortly thereafter in 2006, and your latest, Daughter of the Morning Star, is slated for release on September 21st of this year, correct?
Along with the
audiobook.
Along with the audiobook.
Along with the audio, ebook. Again, glowing praise here. The New York Times Book Review said it's the scenery and the big guy standing in front of the scenery that keeps us coming back to Craig Johnson's lean and leathery masterpiece, Mysteries. The Denver, that was my, ad lib. The Denver Post added, stepping into Walt's world is like slipping on a favorite pair of slippers, and it's where those slippers lead that provides us a thrill. Johnson pens a series that should become a must-read, so curl up, get comfortable, and enjoy the ride. You had me at lean and leathery, Craig. You had me at lean and leathery. Okay, are we ready for some questions now?
Absolutely. Let's jump right in. I'm game.
Before conference organizers canceled due to COVID, you were scheduled to present this month at VoucherCon, the World Mystery Writers Conference, with Anne Hillerman, Tony Hillerman's daughter. I'd love to hear you talk about what Walt Longmire and Henry Standing Bear have in common with Joe Leaphorn and Jim Chee and how they're different. It goes back to Sherlock Holmes and his sidekick Watson. I'm almost sure, but how useful, I guess this is kind of a second part of that question, is the team duo structure in the telling of these mysteries?
Well, I mean, I guess I got to start with the first part of the question. So if I forget the second part of the question,
okay,
just in case. But I've gotten to that point in my life where I kind of need to be prompted every once in a while. My wife tells me like that. But yeah, I mean, as far as Tony, first of all, just as a major influence, as a writer, I don't think that any Western mystery writer can move forward with their career without giving kudos to Tony. And I was fortunate enough that I got to meet Tony. I had a short story that got picked up by Cowboys and Indians magazine that won the Tony Hillerman Award for a short story competition like that. And it was really kind of wonderful because I got to spend an entire evening with Tony. And I swear, I think I learned more in 4 hours with Tony than I did, with a master's and a doctorate, for goodness sake. He was just amazing and so gracious and very giving. Just a very old school, kind of author. And, anybody that reads his books, anybody that knows him, knows just how wonderful of a human being he was and how sly he was, how good of a sense of humor he had. And also, I think a lot of people don't tend to take into consideration the fact that a certain amount of bravery in what it is that he attempted to do like that. A lot of people forget that, he basically started that wonderful series, with 2, Navajo police officers back in 1968. A lot of people kind of forget that. And the amazing thing is that, you kind of have to remind people that, it's, kind of like, très chic, to be native, nowadays. There's a little bit more of of an idea that's kind of cool like that. Well, in 1968, it was maybe just a little bit different in the sense that that was kind of the aim period. That was the occupation of Alcatraz. There was a lot of belligerence. I think within the American culture. Where a lot of like different groups were galvanized. And it was not that cool to be an Indian at that point in time. And so I think it was very daring, of Tony to attempt to try and do, a series, that displayed that culture, and which is very, very much a different world. He's almost single-handedly responsible for the amount of tourism, I think, that goes on, in the southwestern portion of the United States to a great extent. But I think that's, just pretty amazing. And I remember, having dinner with Wes Studi one time, who was actually in one of the earlier versions of his work. And actually now, of course, Anne Hillerman, Tony's daughter, is now doing the series, and I think she's just done a genius job of that by taking a minor character in her father's work and making and promoting her into being the protagonist of her work, and then giving his two main protagonists more background roles, which is kind of wonderful. And then of course, like there've been a number of like film versions and television versions. And now they just announced, of course, there's a brand new version like that that's going to be coming out like that with, I think it's, producers, are Robert Redford and George R.R. Martin. And it's going to be, I think, on AMC, I think it is like that. But it's very wonderful to see those books coming back, and then, of course, Zahn McClarnon, like that, who played Matthias, the tribal police chief on Longmire, is going to be playing one of the major roles in the Hillerman series, which is always
fantastic.
It is pretty wonderful, just for a number of different reasons. But to have that conduit and have it go full circle around, from what Tony did, what I've been able to do, and then to go back around and be able to provide an actor for Tony's series, from our series, is really kind of wonderful. But that's just an amazing, just a brief history. I think a lot of of Tony. As far as like the things that we have in common, I think that I think Tony kind of looked at the world that he lived in there in the Southwest, in and around Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and knew that okay, if I'm going to give an accurate representation, of the place where I live, these are people that have a large scale effect, and a strong resonance, in where it is, that I write about, and that's something I think we both share. I mean, I'm up here on the Wyoming-Montana border like that, and I've got the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow Reservation just immediately to the north of my ranch like that. And that's my gosh, you connect those two reservations together, you're talking about an area the size bigger than Maryland. And so, they are, once again, the same as Tony, an incredible influence, not only in my day-to-day life, they're my friends, my neighbors like that, but, they would have to be a part of the writing, or else, I wouldn't be giving an accurate representation of where it is that I live, to be honest. Now, what was the second part of the question? I told you you'd have to remind me.
I mean, I'm kind of lost in the world of Tony Hillerman again. I need to read those books and listen to the audios, but no, this is kind of just the broader question about I invoked, of course, Holmes and Watson, but how useful is the team duo structure in the telling of mysteries?
Well, I think that anytime you're dealing in a literary sense, dramatic conflict is always going to be something you're going to have in contention, as far as the work is concerned. The other thing is like exactly where I am. There are two different worlds. There's a sovereign nation, two sovereign nations immediately to the north of me that have their own police departments, that have their own laws, their own courts, their own, social fabric. I mean, it's very, very different, on the reservation as opposed to off the reservation. And any sheriff that's going to be working, next to a reservation is certainly going to have his hands full, with, dealing with, the tribal police departments, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, like the federal agents that are going to be involved. I mean, there's a lot of complexities involved with that. And I knew that, I wasn't, completely comfortable, writing a character that was native like that, but I was completely confident, in writing a white guy who happened to be in association, with that native world. And so I knew that Walt would be that, and I wanted that sadder but wiser, kind of character, and the Vietnam veteran like that, and Marine investigator, former University of Southern California, offensive lineman. I mean, there was a lot of things I wanted to draw from to make that character, but I also knew I needed to have an entree, onto the reservation, and Walt would need an entree onto that reservation like that. And so I thought it would be interesting if I could kind of coincide the relationship of these two men and have that, kind of be, kind of exemplify the relationship of on the reservation and off the reservation. And I'm really actually kind of glad you asked that question, simply because Daughter of the Morning Star, deals with that to such a great extent. I mean, Walt's basically helping out Lolo Long, who's the tribal police chief on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Henry, of course, is extremely invested in this situation. And so, this is a book that, really kind of like typifies a lot of, what it is that I began writing these books, for.
Fantastic. I accidentally asked a perfect question.
I doubt that, but thank you anyway.
But okay, that's great. That is wonderful. Second question. I guess it's technically the third because I may have snuck one into the first one. But okay.
You're gonna fall back and go to the one question now that I've proven that I can't retain two questions at once.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
Do that. Let me see here. No. Still a little bit on Hillerman. I heard that he gave you advice on who to use as reader for the Longmire books.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh yeah.
Well, tell me.
Would you like to hear that story? I can actually tell you that story.
And this is not really a second question because you'll probably answer it in this question. So we've answered that that's true. So kind of tell me the genesis of that, and then tell me, what narrator George Guidall has brought to the series.
Well, I mean, okay. First of all, let me do the Tony part first, and then once again, you may have to remind me here once again. Yeah, I was very, very fortunate like that because I met Tony with The Cold Dish, like the very first book that I wrote, and I remember getting to go have dinner with Tony, and the first thing he said when he stood up at the restaurant there and shook my hand was, "Can I write a blurb for you?" And I wasn't very smart and savvy about the publishing world, but I knew having Tony Hillerman write a blurb for me was probably going to be a good thing. Like it, and so I said, absolutely, like that. And so on our answering machine that's ancient, I still have the message from Tony where he called me up on the phone and said, "Craig, I'm writing this blurb for your book, and I can't seem to get this email thingy to work." I love that term, email thingy. And I just thought that I would just call you and read you the blurb. Is that going to be okay? Like, and so then he read this marvelous blurb that he did, for The Cold Dish, and then turned around and even gave me one, for Death Without Company, the second Walt Longmire. But it was just old home week. I mean, he was just an old Oklahoma boy, just a couple of cowboys sitting at the table, swapping stories, and we just had a really, really wonderful time like that. Mm-hmm. And it's a kind of a unique breed of old cowboys that write books. There aren't very many of us, and maybe never were very many of us. But we just really hit it off and had a marvelous 4-hour dinner. And during the course of that dinner, he became aware of the fact that I was in negotiation with getting the audiobooks done by you guys. Yep. And he looked at me and he says, "If they settled on a reader, for your books." And I said, "No, I mean, my gosh, I was barely out of the woods, for goodness sakes. It had never even occurred to me that, that there was going to have to be somebody to actually read the books, And he said, "Well, see if you can get George Guidall. He's done all of my books, and he does a fantastic job. And if you can get George, get him," like that. And so the very next day I was talking to you guys, and and I can't remember who it was I was speaking with, but they said, "We've got a couple of different readers that we're looking at. One of them is George Guidall," and I said, "Him." And they said, "You don't want to hear any of the others?" And I was like, "No, if he's good enough for Tony Hillerman, he's good enough for me." And that was, one of the gifts, that Tony gave to me like that, because it kind of introduced me to George like that. And, once again, we became fast friends like that, because I had heard George read, but wasn't aware that I had heard him read audiobooks before. And I mean, he is just the maestro. He really, really is. He does such an incredible job. He's so fantastic at it. Any and all of us who've ever had a bad experience with an audiobook, the one that I always use is one time I was driving across country and it was late at night and I happened to go into a Flying J truck stop and in the bargain bin, and I would like to add that this was not one of your guys' recorded books, but one of the knockoff brands, and there was a version of Moby Dick. And I thought, well, okay, it's unabridged, so I'll make it all the way through the night, listening to Melville. It'll be great. So I climbed back in the truck and I put the cassette, and this is back in the days. You probably don't remember this. It's for your time. But I put the cassette in the dash like that. And this guy comes on, and evidently he had been kicked out of every civic theater guild in America because he started the thing off with, "Oh, call me Ishmael," and all this stuff. And I was like, boy, about 5 minutes in, I was throwing the cassettes into the back of the truck like that because I was like, okay, I can't take this like that. And so I was extraordinarily fortunate like that to get George. I mean, he's just absolutely amazing. The sense of detail that he puts, into the books. I mean, he calls me up, before he records every book. And I sent him over to my good buddy, Marcus Red Thunder up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, because, there's an awful lot of native language in my books. Like, and, he always wants to make sure that he gets the context right, that he gets the pronunciation right, everything. He's just a consummate performer. And, the effect that he's had on my career, just from the amount of people who've picked up my books on the audiobooks, has just been, dumbfounding. Like it's just a steady stream, of readers that, I get emails from that say, I didn't know about your books, but I listened to every book that George Guidall does. And, he is just such an amazing performer. And that's how I discovered your books. So he's been a blessing in my life.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I started with recorded books in '99. And they took us to the studio in New York, and George was the first narrator ever saw. Like reading
Wow.
I saw it live. I didn't even know this existed, and this man is amazing.
He's stunning. I don't know how many Audis he's won. I've lost count of how many Audis he's won.
I think his catalog is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,700 titles.
Yes. Again, and every time he gets the books, he's so complimentary. He's so flattering. There was an article that he did, in the New York Times, and the interviewer asked him, said, my gosh, you've done War and Peace, you've done, like all of these incredible, classic pieces of literature. What are your favorite books to record? And bless his heart, he goes, there are this series of books about the sheriff in Wyoming, and I was like, holy free, holy. Is
this real?
Oh, that was truly marvelous of him. Whether it's true or not, it was very marvelous of him to say that. So
that's fantastic. This and then you answered everything in that one.
Score.
This one's maybe a little bit simpler, but maybe more difficult.
Okay.
Hell is Empty is maybe my personal favorite Longmire novel. Probably because it's one of your darkest. And I guess my question is, are Walt's darkest days cases behind him?
No.
Okay. Okay, next question now.
Yeah, every once in a while you hit, a source material like that, or you hit an idea, a plot, or characters or whatever that it would be incongruous to treat them with a light quality, and to be honest, I mean, that's absolutely one of my favorite aspects of the books. The funnest parts is the part where I get to put the humor in. I mean, I get a lot of emails and a lot of responses from a lot of law enforcement. And, one of the big things that they're always responding to is by saying that, it's the humor in the books that really captures, a lot of what it's like to be a police officer, to be a sheriff, and all those type of things. So that's kind of important to me. But, like I said, there are certain books where that kind of has to take a back seat, and, with Hell is Empty, I mean, you've got this guy who is, truly dangerous like that. And, he's escaped, and, Walt's going to have to go after him. And it's Walt on his own. He really is up there in the Bighorn Mountains. He's the only one in this blizzard, this spring blizzard, that can go after this guy. And it's really a kind of a mano kind of situation he finds himself in. even to the point where he's, drawn out onto the thin ice of his own sanity almost. And then, there was another one that I did, Depth of Winter, which dealt with, the Mexican cartels. Well, I defy anybody to write anything comedic, about, what's going on down there with those cartels, and the sacrifices and the horrors, that a lot of the Mexican people are having to contend with these individuals. And then, of course, I've got one coming up that I just finished up. That's another one that's going to kind of take us down a little bit of a dark road. I think Walt, if given a choice, certainly would rather not go down those dark roads. But I'm the guy in charge, and so every once in a while, he's going to have to do that. That's, I think, one of the key elements. I think whenever you're writing a series, if you have 16, 17 books, that you're trying to write, and you get that far down the road, and you find yourself in a situation where you don't want to become a widget factory. You really, really want to try and, make each book, stand on its own or be something completely different, and it may be, a little off-putting to some readers, that really kind of want, kind of what I tend to refer to as the grocery checkout novel, which is fine. I mean, that's perfectly fine. And some people find comfort in that. But I'm always going to be trying to stretch it a little bit and maybe do something a little bit different with each book. And, fortunately, I've got some really amazing partners with you guys, with Viking Penguin, with George, with and an awful lot of my readers that are out there that support me in that, which makes it great, because otherwise I would have to stop doing this. I'd have to quit.
Yep. Great. There's a dark one coming now. Okay. We've touched upon a little bit the Longmire TV series. The show had a fantastic run, continues to find new audiences on Netflix. The show features some incredible performances by the likes of Katie Sackhoff, Lou Diamond Phillips, and of course Robert Taylor. I'm sure you've gotten this question a few times, and you kind of alluded to it earlier when you were talking about Walt's backstory and about about him being a Vietnam vet, and I'm like, well, yeah, he is in the books, but but I think a lot of readers or listeners don't understand that their backstories are considerably different between the books and the show. But so that leads me to my question. Has how you approach the characters and cases in the novels been influenced at all by some of by the show, by some of the nuances of the characters, by the way Robert may have portrayed Walt in some instances?
Not really. It's kind of it's odd, I have to admit, that, because one of my favorite quotes, about writing was one by Wallace Stegner at the beginning of his Teaching and Writing Fiction, where he said, the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says, nobody in this book is based off anybody alive or dead, and what a crock that is, and so back when I first started writing, and of course, almost every single character in my books, I can go back and tell you, who it was that I drew from, to assemble that character, whether it was from one individual or, the kind of Dr. Frankenstein method, where you take bits and pieces from a lot of different people to make the character that you need to tell the story that you want to tell. Now, that having been said, cinema is a very powerful medium, and whenever you see, 6 years of your characters up on the screen, you can't help but let that have an effect. But the way it's had an effect is a little bit odd, and maybe somewhat telling of my procedure for what it is that I do. What happened was, as I became friends, with a lot of the actors, they started popping up in my books, but they started popping up as different characters, than the ones that that they're playing on Longmire that. And one of the first ones was actually Zahn McLaren, who I did an interview with yesterday. Who's going to be on the Hillerman piece on AMC, and played the tribal police chief in our series. He's just a marvelous guy, and we just we became good friends. We have some mutual interests, and he's from our part of the world and everything. And so it was kind of interesting that, because when I was writing the novella The Highwayman, I got to the point where I started describing Bobby Womack, who is the highwayman that haunts the Wind River Canyon Highway. And I remember my wife, Judy, turning to me and going, "Is that Zahn McLaren that you're describing?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it actually is, as a matter of fact." Like, and and then and A. Martinez, like that, they were both actually characters that weren't in the books. A. Martinez's character, like at Jacob Nighthorse, is
Mhm.
not in the books, but he's another one that became, a really close friend, really good friend. And and I put him in Depth of Winter, as a doctor, Dr. Martinez in that book, like, and it became a really wonderful character, the character that kind of, became a lot larger character, as I wrote the book, because I kind of became fascinated with him, and he was a really great character. But that's kind of what happens, like that they become friends, and then they kind of pop up in strange places in different ways, more because they're my friends. I think I find it difficult to draw people from the screen an awful lot of the time. I mean, I remember whenever the producers, first asked me, they said, "Well, when you think of Walt Longmire, do you ever think of actors?" And I said, "No, I've just got friends and people I work with and people that I know that I use
Yeah.
as characters." And they said, "Well, if you were to think of actors, who do you think of?" And I was like, uh, uh, Gary Cooper, Ben Johnson, maybe. And they said that was no help at all because all those guys have been dead for 40
Yeah.
years. So I wasn't much help along those lines like that. But it's interesting how the actors do pop up, but just in different places.
Yeah. I kind of had a weird evolution with that in terms of I had in my mind who I thought Walt was reading your books, and then it started to move toward Robert watching the show, and then I saw Robert in an interview, and I'm like, wait a second, he's Australian. And I'm like, I don't even know up or down.
He's actually, I think that speaks a lot, I think, because that's really the tough row to hoe. I mean, because it's called Longmire for a reason. And so for Robert to be able to take that character, that I'd been writing about for like 8 years, and put it up on his back, and do an interpretation that was going to be different. It just was going to be different. I mean, we were fortunate, that Robert's like about 6'3", in his boots, he's 6'4", like that, and he's a big guy, like with that big booming voice and everything. And so there were some elements, that he and the Walt of the books, definitely had in common, but he's obviously a little younger, than, the Walt that's in the books, like, and so is, Lou Diamond Phillips, a little bit younger than, than the Henry in the books, like that. And so I think the big thing is that, you have to try and get, people, I get a lot of those questions from a lot of other authors, like they'll ask me, they'll say, well, hey, first of all, how do you get a TV show? And I'm like, well, first of all, if you're asking a cowboy from a town of 25 how to get a TV show out of your books, you're in deep trouble already, like that. But the other aspect of that being that, you do the same thing that you do in any business. It's kind of like, the wonderful business that I find myself in with you guys. You try and get the very best people that you can to work with, and then you do the hardest thing in the world: leave them alone, let them do what they do best. And we had some really marvelous producers for Longmire, heading off by Greer Shepard, like that, who really understood the books, really got the characters, really understood the whole zeitgeist of the writing, and all of this, and and did a magnificent job. The casting directors did an amazing job. Everybody that was involved with the project, the crew that we had down there in Santa Fe, everybody just did such an amazing job, like that. That I certainly have, no room to complain.
I agree. I mean, while I, implied that Robert's take was unique, it still never lost the sense of your series,
Thank you.
of your just the whole lean and leathery feel of of the books, and I loved it. I mean, I adored it when when it ended after 6 seasons. I was crushed, and I just all good things must come to an end, but I didn't want this one to come to an end at that point. But you had mentioned, and this segues nicely into our final question. You had said about you referenced living in a town of 25. Setting is an important aspect of your series. It's basically its own character in your books. You're West Virginia born, but Wyoming through and through. Hillerman, of course, as we referenced, was the bard of the Four Corners region. James Lee Burke has New Orleans. William Kent Kruger bleeds Minnesota. When I think of Robert B. Parker, I think of Boston. Can you speak to the importance of Wyoming in your novels?
Well, all the way from the get-go, whenever I first started even conceiving of the idea of Walt Longmire, like that was a period in time, I mean, that's 20 years ago, like that, and things have changed a little bit like that. But at that period in time, everything was very noir. Everything was very gritty. It was all detectives in New York or LA or Chicago or Miami. And, they were alcoholics, were divorced for the third time, and all this. And I just thought to myself, I thought maybe that's kind of been done. Maybe it's time to maybe take off in a different direction and do something a little bit different. And for me, living in Wyoming, I was like, okay, maybe that's the idea. And so I started doing a little bit of research, and the county where I live, Johnson County, is about the size of New Hampshire or Vermont. And the Johnson County Sheriff's Department at that point in time had, I don't know, maybe less than a dozen, active, officers at that point. And so we're talking about, a dynamic that's very, very different than the things that had been done, it seemed to me, to death. I mean, a homicide investigator, certainly they have a caseload that's a number of, of opportunities like that. But then again, they're also very focused on what it is they do. And if you're writing murder mysteries, of course, well, they're actively, attempting to try and solve murders. But there's so much more to law enforcement. It just seemed like, especially in that particular style of law enforcement, where, you're a sheriff, you're an elected official. And that is something that's very strange. And whenever I'm trying to explain that to, whenever I'm overseas and trying to explain to the French or the Germans or the Spanish, that, we have, law enforcement officials that are elected, they think that's the most bizarre thing they've ever heard of in their lives. And so what it did, though, was it kind of provided me with a kind of a conduit between Walt and the community that he serves. I didn't really want him to be that isolated, removed, from his community, chrome sunglasses, stereotypical, big-bellied sheriff. I wanted him to be extraordinarily intelligent, well-read, very humanitarian, very kind of connected, with the small community that he services. And I think that's, a key issue that maybe is sometimes overlooked whenever people talk about the West. I mean, it's always, a man's a man and does what he does, and every man's an island unto himself and all that. The history doesn't stand by that. I mean, if you look at ranching communities, whether it's, the haying season, irrigation season, branding season, or calving season like that, you can't get the job done by yourself. And so whenever the blizzards hit or the droughts hit or anything, you're even more kind of reliant on that community and that's around you. And there's I think an important aspect of that comes across, I think, hopefully in the Longmire series, that we're all kind of here to look out for each other for a little bit and try and do the best that we can to help each other out as we go along. And sometimes, whenever that veneer of civilization is stretched as thin as it is in places like Wyoming, which is the ninth largest state, with a population of only, about 500,000 people, less than 500,000 people. The big joke is there are more pronghorn antelope in Wyoming than there are people. And so, but, whenever you do have people, you're going to have some problems like that. So Walt is always going to have, something to be involved with. But yeah, I think, to leave something like that out of the books would have been, nothing short of criminal. So.
Wow, that's very, that's very insightful. I never kind of thought of it in that way, in terms of the mere act of having your protagonist be a sheriff instead of a PI forces you to frame so many things in a more intimate context, because that's.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen it in action like that in a lot of sheriff's offices like that, because people who would never walk into a police department or a police office in their lives will march right into a sheriff's office and say, I've got a problem with that guy that lives to the south of me and he's putting a fence up and he's partially on my property and I voted for you like that. And so, I mean, when you do think about it in many ways, that is one of the most sacred and trusted, things that, a member of a community can do. or a constituency can do is they actually gave you their vote. They gave you their vote of confidence, their vote of ability, to entail you to be able to do the job that they want you to do. Well, along with that comes a certain amount of responsibility like that. So they may come marching into your office and pounding on the desk and want to know what you're going to do about their problems.
I have a few neighbors that are like that.
Same problem, no matter where you go. Like, it doesn't matter.
Wow. Well, I think that about wraps it up here, Craig. That was wonderful. That I got answers to questions I didn't even ask. And
that's usually the problem. Like, I go off on a tirade.
That's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what our listeners wanted. So I guess for now, we just wait on pins and needles for September 21st, correct?
Absolutely.
On hardcover, ebook, and audio simultaneously. And we'll see you on the bestseller list.
I'll be glad to be there. Now, always glad to be partnered with you guys. Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it.